there's no science that I'm aware of or that the Department of Primary Industries has put forward, at least at this stage, that tells us, what is going to happen if those fish are removed. When are they going to come back? Is it months? Is it years? And if they do come back and you've got an ongoing tunnel net fishery, how long are they going to last before they're removed and the same waiting game begins before the next set of flats fish come into that flat? So that is what localised depletion is about. That's the heart of the problem as I understand it.
G'day and welcome to another instalment of the Flyfishers podcast.
Since 1967, we've been spreading the bug of fly fishing at our Melbourne fly shop.
Join us as we celebrate the fun of fly fishing and chat with characters that enjoy it as much as we do.
Whether you're just starting out or have some experience, we hope our ego-free commentary helps demystify fly fishing and inspires you to visit new places and try new techniques.
Today we're talking tunnel nets. And if you care about saltwater fly fishing, permit, GTs, queenies, goldens, and all the magic that happens on a Queensland flat, this is something you need to hear. Tunnel nets are being trialled as a replacement gear after gill nets. But the reality is they can clean out a flat in one tide, scooping up everything from juveniles to iconic sportfish and leaving bugger all for anyone else. I first heard about these nets when Kim McPherson phoned, the president of the North Queensland Flyfishers Club. He was instrumental in bringing together a group to launch the Inshore Flats Project, a team that are doing everything they can to put a stop to these nets. And they need your support. This isn't some future problem. Trials have already run on world-class flats at Hinchinbrook, the Whitsundays and Gladstone. What has been observed from these trials is already deeply concerning with dead and disoriented fish. If we don't pay attention now, we'll likely lose one of the best flats fisheries on the planet before it even reaches its full potential. Joining me is Chris Burgess, who's been right in the thick of it. He's going to explain what tunnel nets are, why they're so dangerous, and how we as anglers can actually do something about it.
So in this episode of the Flyfishers podcast, we're talking to Chris Burgess, who is a very passionate fly fisherman, and you may have come across him in FlyLife magazine. He's a regular contributor there at FlyLife. Chris, tell us a bit about your fly fishing background.
Yeah, okay. Firstly, let me just say thanks very much, Andrew, for having me on today. I got into fishing as a kid. When I was 5 years old, my dad used to take me offshore from Newcastle, where we used to fish for pelagic fish on lures. And then I moved to Melbourne when I was about 12 years old, and my uncle gave me a fly rod, and I had a farm dam down there in Melbourne that we stocked with rainbow trout every year. So I'd come home from school, duck down to the farm dam and fish for those rainbow trout, which I would catch and release. At one stage, I even set up a little tagging program with bread tags and numbered them, and I was catching the same fish multiple times and that sort of thing. When I got my driver's license, I got into fly fishing the rivers and streams in Victoria in a big way. And then, having been through university, I started a professional career that ultimately took me to Sydney. And when I was in Sydney, I bought a boat and I got into the saltwater fly fishing on the harbour for kingfish and Australian salmon, which was fantastic. And around about 2010, really through reading FlyLife actually, and some of the people I met in the wonderful saltwater fly fishing community in Sydney, I heard about these incredible sand flats in northern Queensland, and I started doing annual trips up to Weipa, where I fished with Alan Philliskirk and his team up there. I caught my first ever permit with fish on a flat near Weipa. Perhaps it was around about 2012, if I remember correctly. It was a wonderful experience, and it really hooked me on saltwater flats fly fishing. More recently, I've been very privileged to be able to move out of that professional career and devote a lot of my personal time to fly fishing. I've had some incredible opportunities to fish some amazing world-class flats outside of Australia. I've fished the Seychelles, I've fished Bahamas, I've fished Belize, I've fished Florida Keys, all of which were incredible fisheries. But at the same time, something happened to me which really was an epiphany, which I wrote about recently in FlyLife, and that was that I started towing my boat and my tent with Esty, my wife, up the Queensland coast and fishing unguided for permit and golden trevally. And it just really blew me away how incredible that flats fishery is on the east coast of Queensland when I started, pulling up at local boat ramps, going out onto the flats, seeing permit and catching permit. I've been at lodges in Belize, for example, and in the Bahamas where you sit around the table at night. People are paying thousands of dollars for the privilege to be there, and the angler next to you says, "Geez, it was a fantastic day. We saw four permit today for the day, and I had one shot, and the fish came right up next to the permit, and it looked like it was going to eat the fly, and then it backed off, and I didn't get him, but that's probably the best permit shot I've had in about 3 years." And that angler is over the moon with that experience on that day, those 4 shots. And as anyone who's fished Queensland's sandflats know, we have a permit fishery that on a good day will give you far more shots than that. And if you learn how to catch these fish, either by fishing with a professional guide, which is always my recommendation if you're new to permit fishing, or you invest a lot of time yourself, do it yourself, which a number of people, a lot of locals do very successfully in Queensland. These fish are now very catchable. In the last 5 years, a lot of people, a lot of guides, a lot of great anglers have put a lot of time into how to catch our permit in Queensland. And now in Queensland, when you have a good day on the permit flats, you're not sitting around the table saying you saw 4 fish and you had 1 shot that you missed. You're talking about having more than 20 shots. You're talking about multiple fish looking at your fly, and you're talking about 1 or more in the net, and you're absolutely over the moon. And that's why this really is a globally significant fishery, and that is increasingly becoming recognised because of the work that the guides are doing in promoting it overseas. And for those of us in Australia, of course, I really see it as a national fly fishing asset, and I think its destiny ultimately is to be recognised as one of the finest flats fisheries in the world, and possibly the best permit fishery in the world.
So it's likely this fishery's always been there, but it's really only now that anglers have wised up to it and have worked out how to catch these fish. And, now they're starting to target these flats fisheries and get better and better at it. And we're realising just how widely distributed they are too. Your article, Permit Epiphany, which is in FlyLife magazine, details a DIY beach-based permit fishing trip where you guys cleaned up, you and your wife, Esty. So clearly, these fish are quite catchable and are within the reach of so many fly fishers.
Yeah, that's correct. That was an incredible do-it-yourself trip that I wrote about there. Part of a road trip around Western Australia where we caught 14 permit in 5 days. And there's no doubt the same or better potential exists in Queensland. This year there's been some phenomenal flats captures, and you can see that when you look at social media. Just in relation to the development of the permit fishery, I should, of course, acknowledge that people started catching these fish in the 1990s. They were pioneers up at the Cape in Greg Bethune, for example, Alan Philliskirt, obviously, who were pursuing these fish through the 90s. And really, back in those days, some fish were initially caught on clouses, and then there were some quite large crab patterns that were experimented with over time that were quite heavy crabs. And really where we are today, I suppose the one thing I do want to acknowledge is it's not the last 5 years of work. It's all of that work over the last 30 years that began with those first pioneers that's being passed down to more people getting into the sport, which is really seeing the situation now where if you invest in a good professional guide in Queensland on the flats with good tides, which the guides will always recommend to you, and good weather conditions, that you have a very high prospect of seeing and catching a permit, which is fantastic. And it's that whole, effectively 30-year period of information gathering through the hard work of so many people that's led to that current position where these fish are very catchable.
Yeah. And, obviously, sadly, the reason we're sitting down and recording this podcast today is because this permit fishery and the flats fisheries in far north Queensland are under threat by tunnel nets. So you've been an instrumental part of starting a thing called the Inshore Flats Project. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, I can. So what the Inshore Flats Project is it's a collective of people, mostly based in Queensland, but including some people outside Queensland, such as yourself, Andrew, who've gotten together and decided to take a stand against the tunnel nets. The broad mission of the Inshore Flats Project, if I can put it that way, is to promote the protection and conservation of Queensland's inshore flat areas for the benefit of everyone. Obviously, fly fishers and this flats fly fishery that we're talking about are a focus and the focus, really, the principal focus of the Inshore Flats Project. But we want to see these inshore flats areas protected for everyone, not just fly fishers, other recreational anglers, lure anglers who love fishing for species like giant trevally and queenfish and the like, mums and dads who want to take their kids down to the beach and throw a bait in and catch a fish that they can take home to have for dinner. That's really the broad mission of the Inshore Flats Project. There are certainly long-term aspirations for this project to become involved in a broad range of issues that affect the health and the conservation of Queensland's inshore flats. But the initial focus right now is the tunnel net threat that has arisen from the decision of Fisheries Queensland and the Department of Primary Industries in Queensland to trial tunnel nets as new commercial fishing gear on the flats. What
is a tunnel net? Can you talk us through specifically what that is and why it poses a threat for these fish?
Yeah, sure. So tunnel nets are a huge inshore net that target the fish that live on intertidal sand flats. And broadly, this is how they work. At high tide, a team of 3 or 4 fishermen will go out onto the sand flat with a central boat and a few dories. They'll get in the water and they'll use stakes to fish to fix into the sand, a set of mesh wings. Now, those mesh wings are up to 1.6 kilometres long in total. They can be 800 metres on each side. And you fix those mesh wings at high tide around the sand flat area that you want to fish. And because it's high tide, all those flats critters, the permit, the goldies, giant trevally, other species of fish will be up there within that area inside the 1.6 kilometre wings doing what they do at high tide on a flat. But of course, as the tide falls, those fish need to leave that flat and head to deeper water, as they habitually do every day. And what happens is, as those fish try to swim off the drying flat into deeper water, the mesh wings guide the path of the fish into a small tunnel sock at the base of the net. And that tunnel sock is positioned below the low water mark so that the fish remain underwater while small quantities of the catch are lifted into the boat by the fishermen and that catch is sorted. And the only fish that are not trapped in the tunnel net sock are any little fish that are small enough to pass through the small gaps in the mesh without being harmed. Now, unfortunately, the topographic requirements for a tunnel net sand flat are quite specific, and they do match the topographic requirements for a great fly fishing and other recreational fishing flat. That is a sand flat that doesn't drop too quickly into deep water, but also is not too flat, and which has areas that drain into a low point. And our flats fish use those low points where the tunnel net sock would be positioned to swim onto and off the flats with the tide. One last point to make about tunnel nets is that presently the only tunnel net fishery in Queensland is a small-scale fishery in the southeast. And most of the licences for that fishery are in Moreton Bay. Now, that fishery targets mainly smaller sized platefish, whiting, bream, flathead and the like. And as we can discuss later, the operating environment and fish caught in Moreton Bay is quite different to what will occur if a new tunnel net fishery is introduced in central and north Queensland. just to provide some further context, which I think is important, the reason why this trial is being done relates to the phase out of gill nets in mid-2027. So back in 2024, a decision was made by the federal and state governments to phase out gill nets from use in Queensland in areas in or adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park waters. That phase out is happening in mid-2027, and at the moment there's 27 temporary gill net licence holders whose licences will end and in mid-2027. So what this research trial is about is looking at whether there are alternative types of gear that can be provided to commercial fishermen to use instead of gill nets. And one of those gear types being investigated is the tunnel nets.
It sounds like these tunnel nets are seriously effective. Are there any estimates as to percentage of fish that might be on a flat actually finding their way into a tunnel net? And we're talking, I guess, more specifically about the kind of fish that would be target species to a fly fisher.
Yeah, so I don't think at the moment there's science that's been generated, if there is, I haven't seen it, about precisely what proportion of biomass of fish on a flat will end up in the tunnel net. But what I can say is it would depend upon the size of that flat relative to those 800-metre tunnel net wings. Certainly as a fly fisher, when you think of the size of some of the flats that you fish and the length of those wings, you can envisage scenarios where, if it's not the whole biomass, a very high proportion of the biomass on an individual flat at that high tide will end up in that tunnel net sock. And that's just to illustrate it with actual numbers. 16 fishing days were done in central and north Queensland with the tunnel net gear for the purposes of the research trial last year. The most effective shot caught a staggering 6,000 fish plus. It's over 6,000 fish on that one individual flat that was netted on that day. So there's no questioning the effectiveness of this gear to put the fish that are on the flat at high tide into the tunnel net sock. As one of the Moreton Bay tunnel net fishermen recently said in a promotional video that Fisheries Queensland have released, everything within that area of the wings ends up in that tunnel net sock.
Wow. Yeah. And the current stats on the species being caught and volume of fish, it looks like trevally of multiple species and permit are a huge percentage of the catch.
Yeah, that's right. And this really has implications for both fly fishers, recreational fishers, and the commercial fishermen themselves. So in the East Coast fin fishery in Queensland, as it currently exists, on the data that I've seen from the Department of Primary Industries, 35% of the catch is barramundi and king threadfin. Those are higher value fish. They are fish that Queenslanders love eating and are accustomed to eating. Now, in the 2025 tunnel net trial catch data from those 16 days of fishing, that percentage for barramundi and king salmon drops to approximately 3%. And this is no surprise to fly fishers, because when you spend thousands of hours, as the guides and local anglers do, staring at these sand flats through Polaroids, in the dry season, you don't see appreciable numbers of barramundi. I think I saw 2 this year, and I spent many, many hours on these sand flats fishing them. So that higher value catch, which is currently the target species in the northern region's fishery as it's defined in Queensland's harvest strategy, is not there. What you see is 97% of the catch being byproduct, in other words, lower value to the seafood sector species, or bycatch, in other words, no value. And trevally, this is a mix of this figure of golden trevally, giant trevally, potentially some others like brassies. The data that I've seen from DPI doesn't distinguish between the particular trevally species, but they are the number one catch by weight trevally, and that's about 23% by weight trevally. Permit come in at the number 6 catch at about 6% by weight. So there's just no doubt that a high number of golden trevally, giant trevally and permit are caught. And again, that's just no surprise to any fly fisher who fishes these flats when they look at the nature of the gear, the fact that it is gear you need a sand flat for, because you've got to stake the nets. You can't do it in the more muddy estuarine environments where a lot of barramundi and king threadfin salmon fishing happens. And once you move on to those sand flats in central and north Queensland, they're the fish you see through the Polaroids. It's your golden trevally, it's giant trevally, a lot of juvenile giant trevally, which is particularly concerning for everyone who loves to catch those species, not just fly fishers, people who throw lures around headlands.
Of course, yeah, the popper fishermen, and that's a massive market in itself. That's probably bigger than fly fishing itself.
It is a big market, and it's interesting with some of the flats I fish in North Queensland. There are days where I scratch my head at the end of the day because I come back and I think, gee, I just saw juvenile giant trevally everywhere today, and I didn't see much else. Maybe for whatever reason on that day, some flats just seem to be covered in them, And when I say juvenile, I'm talking about fish in that 40, 45 centimetre range. I don't know. I can't tell you at the moment what the exact science is on the reproductive size of golden trevally, but I certainly have a real concern that those fish may be sexually immature, and if they're taken using tunnel nets in large numbers, they're not going to attract a significant seafood price at all. But there is that flow-on impact for not just fly fishers but other recreational fishermen in terms of a potential reduction in that local area of adult giant trevally. And of course, they're an important high ecosystem predator. They're not. They serve a purpose as part of a single ecosystem that represents our ocean. So
it sounds like we've been almost lucky to date that the likes of golden trevally and permit, these other flat species, haven't really been targeted by commercial means before. Is that largely due just to the market price of the fish, do you think? Or it seems very concerning that all of a sudden, they might be wanting to create a market for what are just such spectacular sport fish and species that should be valuable to every fly fisher, whether they're fly fishing for trout or saltwater. It's an important fishery that with a fly rod you can have a bloody lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is I wouldn't characterise it as luck. I would say it's reality. There's a reason why this fishery hasn't happened already in Queensland, and that reason why is that these are not good eating fish and they attract low market values. If these fish were a high value seafood species, they would have been, permit and golden trevally. A fishery like this would have been set up long ago. In Moreton Bay, they've been operating tunnel nets down there for some time, but it hasn't happened up here. And the reason why it hasn't happened is because we're spoilt for choice in Queensland. We've got amazing mud crab, we've got prawns, we've got so many different species of fish in those inshore estuarine environments. We have barramundi and king threadfin, which have high market acceptance. On the other hand, people don't like eating golden trevally in general. So that's why it hasn't developed. And this is why I say this catch composition data has important implications for commercial fishermen too, because the tunnel net gear type has high operating costs. There's startup costs in investing in things like dories and the gear itself. And there's the need to pay 3 or 4 fishermen for what seems to me to be a full day's work, because you've got to fish the whole run-out tide cycle, which at least 6 hours typically. And then you got to launch your boats, you got to clean your boats, you got to wash it down. So that is a significant cost when you tunnel net, and yet you're catching these lower value fish, that 97% byproduct or bycatch, and you need to pay everyone's wages for that full day's work. And we can talk about localised depletion and what that means in more detail, but I have a real fear that this gear is a recipe for localised depletion in central and north Queensland, because you have lower value seafood species, higher operating costs that then place an economic pressure that's unavoidable on the commercial fishermen who are just trying to make a living to take enough of these lower value fish for an individual net shot to be able to pay everyone.
Got a business to run, don't they? And eventually it just has to point to volume being the way to actually make a dollar rather than the market price of the fish, which is normally how it goes for those higher value species, I guess.
Yeah, it does seem to me to be that way. And the other question it raises that's significant is this. The argument that's often put forward in the context of tunnel nets by those who may support the gear type is that local communities need local seafood. And I understand that. I support appropriate commercial fishing in Queensland. I go down to the local seafood business when I'm in Queensland and I buy fish. Now, why do I do that when I'm an obsessive fisherman who spends, so many hours on the water? I do it because I don't like the taste of golden, trevally and permit. I don't think that if I, once every couple of weeks knock the odd fish on the head on the flat, it would hurt the population. I don't take those fish because I don't like the taste of them. And other fly fishers are the same. We're obviously very conservation minded, and we do try to handle our fish as best we can, and we do support catch and release, but these are not good eating fish. So I go to the local seafood shop and I buy seafood there and support that fisherman and that industry. And that's a good thing to do that Queenslanders will continue to do. But the question is this the solution to the gill nets coming out? And everything I've seen suggests the answer is no.
So what would localised depletion? What was it?
Localised depletion. It's a term.
I'm not a scientist.
It's a term I hadn't heard of until I became involved in learning about this issue and trying to help raise awareness and the like. I think the easiest way to illustrate localised depletion is this. I'll just give you an example of one flat in North Queensland that I fish. That flat, when you visit it, invariably has small pods of golden trevally. There's about 5 fish per pod, and there'll be a number of pods on that flat at high tide. And it's an incredible flat. They tail like crazy. They're sucking up yabbies from in the sand, and they're actually really hard to catch. I've caught permit on the same flat, and generally I regard the permit on that flat as being easier than the golden trevally. But anyway, I'm not the only person who fishes it. I see other people fishing it, and guides fish it, and clients from overseas and from interstate travel to fish that flat, right? Now, imagine a typical day up there. The usual scattering of pods of 5 fish is along the flat. Those fish are often within an area that would fit within that 1.6 kilometre wing length of the tunnel net. And so you've got a scenario where if that tunnel net is placed there on the day that those pods are there, those fish will end up in the tunnel net sock. Then you've got a commercial operator who needs to pay everyone's wages. Let's just imagine, for example, that there's 75 fish in that net sock that weigh 5 kilograms. Now, even if the commercial operator were to say, well, I'll only take a third today, so I'll take 25 of those 75 fish because I want, the other fish to go back so that there's fish left on the flat. At 5 kilos each and a $4 per kilo beach market price, and it can be less for golden trevally from what I've learned, that gets you $500, and you've got 4 wages to pay. So that's that economic pressure I'm talking about to keep those other golden trevally and sell them, however you can. And if that happens, if those 75 golden trevally are taken off that flat, that single net shot itself, let alone the cumulative effect of multiple net shots as the season progresses, means that those pods of fish are gone. And then the question becomes, well, how soon before more fish move in on that flat? Localised depletion is immediately after the netting event. The fish are gone. When are they coming back? One thing that fly fishers are or one reason I should say why fly fishers in Queensland are so concerned about this is our industry and community has been through what happened in Hervey Bay where that was really one of the birthplaces of saltwater fly fishing in Australia. Again, a lot of pioneering work in the early 1990s. I think from memory, it's FlyLife issue 4 that talked about these legends of the sport back then getting together in Hervey Bay and trying to learn how to catch golden trevally on fly by reference to I think it was Dean Butler who wrote it, the experiences that they'd had in Florida, but other guides, after that early work, some guides moved in and that fishery was a real thing. And then those golden trevally were netted on the flats. And when you talk to people who fish Hervey Bay today, the nets have been removed now, which is great, but it's still not where it was now in 2026. It's still not back to where it was, that golden trevally fishery. So I give that example of localised depletion with those 75 fish. How long before those fish come back? And that's not just a problem for fly fishers. That's a problem for the commercial fishermen who've invested in this gear, because the site-specific requirements for tunnel netting, which, as I said, unfortunately overlap with the requirements for a good fly fishing flat, mean that in the area where that professional fisherman is operating, that there may be a limited number of sites where they can use the gear. And so if this localised depletion happens due to the economic pressures and also just the fact that these are larger flats fish, they're not smaller bream and whiting down in Moreton Bay, they're larger fish. And obviously that can limit the size of the biomass compared with having smaller fish on a flat. So, how do we know that this can go ahead without individual flats being depleted in this way, which will cause harm to everyone and, for reasons we can talk about, will destroy the flats fishery in those areas? How do we know that? The answer is we don't. There is just, all there is the anecdotal experience of fly fishing guides in the fly fishing community who've seen localised depletion with other gear types that often involve smaller scale nets. We know that, anecdotal evidence, but there's no science that I'm aware of or that the Department of Primary Industries has put forward, at least at this stage, that tells us, what is going to happen if those fish are removed. When are they going to come back? Is it months? Is it years? And if they do come back and you've got an ongoing tunnel net fishery, how long are they going to last before they're removed and the same waiting game begins before the next set of flats fish come into that flat? So that is what localised depletion is about. That's the heart of the problem as I understand it.
It almost seems like they're willing to, start netting the fish, taking them out to then realise that, this didn't work. And they're quite prepared to roll the dice on that.
That's a really big concern, and I'm glad you raised it, because certainly the view of the Inshore Flats Project, a collective that has been fortunate to obtain some expert advice on a volunteer basis from a particularly distinguished scientist, is that you need to apply the precautionary principle when you're making decisions about conducting a trial like this. And so you don't just fish and see what happens and then say bad luck. If you take them all in one net shot and they're not there next month, the precautionary principle says where there's a lack of scientific uncertainty, that's a reason to not proceed with that sort of work, and rather that the studies you would do in advance are determining what the stock biomass is for these species if you were going to pursue that path, and looking at, trying to put some scientific parameters in advance around how many fish you can take. But in the context of tunnel nets, there's a whole lot of problems about whether or not that research could ever justify the investment, because the end return with lower value seafood species like permit and golden trevally that haven't had this focus historically is unlikely, in my view, to justify that investment.
Yeah. I guess based on what you've seen and what we know about these species, how ugly do you think that story, really is as far as post-release survival for fish that have been in a tunnel net? Like I've seen some footage there, and I see these guys scooping up these fish in landing nets and slapping them down on a stainless steel table to be measured and logged or sold eventually, presumably. Like the fish handling seems a little bit agricultural and rough to me. Like, do we know anything about post-release survival of these fish that are being caught?
Well, Andrew, this is another deeply concerning issue, to be frank. There's been some promotional videos, for example, recently released about the research program where the claim is made that nothing dies with tunnel nets. That's the words that are used in the promotional video. Now, we know that claim is not true in a literal sense because there's no doubt fish mortalities occurred in the 2025 trials that were conducted of the tunnel nets. I've seen, for example, photos of a dead milkfish trapped in the tunnel net wing mesh. I've seen dead garfish on a tunnel net sorting tray and the like. So we've invited the Department of Industries to share with us their data about the number of fish observed dead from the tunnel net trials, including the size and species. And I don't have that data, but my preliminary understanding that may or may not be right once we see that data is that some fish, unsurprisingly, like baitfish species and a fly rod favourite in giant herring, may have higher mortality rates than others. But I'm talking here now about observed mortality. And that really comes in part, that observed mortality, from having thousands of fish crowded together in a small tunnel net sock. And they're all different shapes and sizes. You know, they may range from those smaller baitfish species which feature in the tunnel net catch composition like herring and biddies and garfish, right through to a 1 metre long giant trevally. You know, we see 1 metre long trevally on the flats. So they're all in that net thrashing about while the catch is being sorted, and they're obviously in a state of stress in that environment. But in terms of fish that are released, that's what raises this question about post-release mortality. And there are two aspects to that, I guess. The first is that based on the scientific advice that I've heard, the fact that you see a released fish, an unwanted fish, whether it be bycatch or otherwise, swim off from the tunnel net, does not mean that fish will survive. There's a risk, obviously, that the fish has been injured by the process of being in that crowded tunnel net sock or the sorting of the catch. Where it's
out of the water for quite a duration of time.
Yes, and again, you know, this is one of the reasons why that there are differences between Central and North Queensland and Moreton Bay. Warmer water temperatures, Central and North Queensland compared with the cooler water, Moreton Bay, warmer air temperatures, Central and North Queensland, tropical environment, etc. But interestingly, that the very first study, as I understand it, into the feasibility of tunnel netting in North Queensland was a study in 2022 up in Cardwell, where they laid a tunnel net up there. And what the researchers in that study said is they recommended post-release survival studies be conducted because of this concern that seeing a fish swim away does not mean that it survives. It may have been injured, as I said. And it spoke of studies like holding fish in a tank for 48 hours and seeing if they're still alive, and long-term programs that might involve radio tagging and the like. Now, of course, the research program that we're talking about now isn't complete yet. Need to acknowledge that. But certainly based on the work that's been done to date, my understanding is no studies have been done to look at what proportion of the catch that's seen to swim away in fact survives. And then, of course, the other concern that's important in Central and North Queensland with unwanted catch that may be returned to the water is this post-release predation on the fish. I've seen a photo, which is on the Inshore Flats Project website, for example, which I understand is of the Moreton Bay tunnel net fishery, that shows the tunnel net sock at that end stage of fishing and a line of pelicans just waiting behind it. In North Queensland, obviously sharks are a big issue. We always see sharks when we're fishing. And so there's a concern that sharks, which can learn pretty quickly when there's a free feed on offer, will learn to associate the tunnel net sock with a bit of a free buffet.
Doesn't take long, especially, sharks obviously, but birds as well. very well evolved at sniffing out an opportunity like that. You'd have to presume that some of these fish that are being released and maybe a little slow to get going are going to get hoovered by seabirds.
Absolutely. And just in relation to sharks, to give you an example, a member of the public who observed one of these trials conducted in 2025 in a flat skiff, who was out fly fishing and just literally stumbled across the trial, took some photos and videos and reported, I don't think there's a photo of this, I should say, but reported a disorientated permit swimming up to his flat skiff and banging into it after being released from the tunnel net. And that's why seeing a fish swimming off, it's an example of why that doesn't mean the fish will survive. And no doubt that concern is why these earlier researchers in 2022 recommended the conduct of post-release mortality studies, which to date, as I understand it, have not been conducted.
Yeah, the government talks about low-impact alternative gear. After gill nets, in your view, how do tunnel nets stack up on impact ecologically and visually compared with just leaving those flats net free?
Yeah, look, but based on my understanding of the gear, it's demonstrated effectiveness to catch thousands of fish in a single net shot from the trials. The risk of localised depletion, which we've discussed, and the scientific uncertainty about issues like post-release mortality and how many fish you can or can't take in commercial quantities off a flat while avoiding localised depletion. I just don't think tunnel nets stack up at all ecologically. In my view, leaving the flats net free is obviously the best way to protect and conserve these inshore flat ecosystems, which are also a nursery environment. Of course, I can't remember whether I mentioned this before, but these tunnel net trials in 2025 actually captured over 50 different species of fish. And that really underscores the importance of the flats, not just to fly fishermen, but to the marine ecosystem as a whole. These are important habitats. And unfortunately, tunnel nets lack capture selectivity. What I mean by that is everything within the area of those wings ends up in that tunnel net sock. Now, that's true, there's harvest selectivity in the sense that when you scoop the fish out of the sock, you sort them. And if there's a fish that you don't want to keep because it's bycatch, or you do think you've got enough golden trevally for the day, it's absolutely true that those other fish can be released. But that fact does not account for the economic pressure to harvest lower value fish to pay for people, which we talked about, and it doesn't account for the scientific uncertainty around localised depletion or the scientific uncertainty around post-release mortality.
Yeah, I'm thinking economically as far as primarily, I guess, the guides in these areas, but also the tackle shops and the flow-on effect. But, I'm a frequent visitor to Hinchinbrook fishing with Australian fly fishing outfitters. I think I've probably had 20 odd days of guided fishing up there, and I've caught one permit, and I'd keep going back. It's such an incredible experience when you get one. My experience isn't unique. I think most people who are spending the money on guides are prepared to, pay for many days of guided fishing for that chance to catch a permit or golden trevally. You're always going to be catching other fish as well, of course, but the permit is the holy grail. Economically, the flow-on effect of this it could be catastrophic for a whole industry, couldn't it, should these tunnel nets get up?
Yes, I agree with everything you just said. And I think, catching a permit in saltwater fly fishing, it really is the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest. I think all fly fishers feel that way. And that's why you can be sitting around a table at a lodge in Belize and someone's over the moon to have seen for a permit and had one sniff at the fly. You know what I mean? And perhaps just one little footnote there is, of course, this ANAC permit we have in Queensland is a special fish because it's endemic to Australia. It's also found in the Northern Territory in Western Australia, but there's no evidence of it being found anywhere else in the world. And that's actually feeding a lot of the international tourism now, because people are so permit obsessed around the world. They want to tick off the big four. They want to catch their Falcatus permit, obviously, over in Central America. They want to catch their Indo-Pacific or block eye permit, which we also have in Queensland, and I understand was also captured by the tunnel nets in the trials. They want to catch their Africanus permit over in Oman. People now travel to Oman. And to tick off Trachinotis anac, they've got to come to Australia, and there's no better place in Australia for Trachinotis anac that I've seen than the flats in Queensland.
Even the fact you can tick off 2 of the 4 in one location is...
Yeah. The only thing I'd add is, of course, 2's never enough. As soon as you tick off an anac and a block eye, you want to catch the next one. But just returning to the economics of it, so I spoke earlier about this collective, the Inshore Flats Project that's formed. And one thing that the members of that project have done is conduct a data collection exercise that estimates the value of direct tourist spend on Queensland flats fly fishing at $7.3 million in 2026. So the way that was done was to basically survey all of the guides who take bookings for fly fishing clients on the flats and ask them, what their projected bookings were in 2026. I think from memory it was 1,800 days last year, so it's growing. And the guides talk about that, how there's more and more interest in our flats. I think that's 30% growth in the around about 30% in the number of guided days that are booked. So that direct spend, 7.3 million, that's just talking about the spend on the guides and the accommodation and the meals while they're doing the guided fishing. But of course, that's only a portion of your spend when you go on a fishing holiday.
Of course, money just leaves your wallet.
It does. And it's interesting because one of the other things the Inshore Flats Project has done is put together some case studies to help the decision makers understand what the flow-on effects are. And, particularly for international anglers, but also interstate anglers, they build a whole holiday in Queensland around this fishing activity. If you're coming from America or from Melbourne in the depths of winter and you're desperate to stay warm, you might do your week's guided fishing where there's that direct spend component that feeds into the $7.3 million I was talking about. But then you might fly your wife and your kids up, or your husband for female anglers like Esty, although if she left me out, I'd kill her. You fly them up and then you have a few days on the beach. And the case studies we've put together show real people doing that as part of their fishing holidays. And of course, also there's the unguided expenditure. It's not just the guided flats fishing expenditure. There's people who I see at boat ramps from Coffs Harbour who have a boat on the back, who are travelling up the coast and want to fish the flats. There's the lure anglers. There's the mums and dads. And it's quite hard to estimate that proportion of revenue. What we did with DPI is we said, well, let's take a highly conservative estimate and assume that only 5% of the entire contribution from recreational fishing to the Queensland economy per annum comes from fishing flats. I suspect it's far higher than that, but let's just be really conservative and say it's 5% from all of this activity. That figure on the studies that have been done gets you to a contribution of more than 125 million per annum.
Wow.
Right. And by comparison, our best estimate with the data available to us at the Inshore Flats Project of the wholesale revenue that a tunnel net fishery may bring for these lower value byproduct species in central and north Queensland is less than $1 or $2 million per year. And the reason why that figure is so low include the operational constraints on when and where tunnel netting can occur, because weather conditions can limit the number of days and will, as do the times of year. You can't tunnel net in central and north Queensland during the wet season or the warmer months. May to September is the time period that is identified by the Department of Primary Industries for tunnel netting. So you might be looking at individual operators only being able to do 1 or 2 shots a month for these lower value fish. So it's a small revenue stream fishery, but unfortunately, that doesn't mean it doesn't have these impacts that we've been talking about, because when you've got net wings that are 1.6 kilometres long and there's direct resource conflict with the locations that you need for tunnel netting and for the recreational flats fishery, that one net shot that generates little money, maybe a couple of $1,000s or something in that vicinity for that one net shot, the harm that it can cause economically for this other economic activity that can occur on that same flat when there are fish there is enormous. And
it's not even an argument, in my view. These flats fisheries are generating a huge amount of income and money for the economy. Like the guided angler in particular is spending so much more than what it sounds the commercial gain from tunnel netting would produce. There's no comparison.
I agree with that. That reflects everything I've learnt and I understand through getting involved in this issue. And, you can see why this economic harm to the fly fishing industry will happen. Just put yourself in the shoes for a moment of a foreign or interstate tourist who's paid tens of thousands of dollars for that big trip to Queensland to catch a permit. And it's perfect weather, and you pull out on the flat and the guide's looking at you, gee, Chris, this is fantastic. We got the right tide, the wind's dropped, the sun's out, pausing there, the conditions you want for tunnel netting, neap tides, light wind. You need light wind and calm conditions. You pull out on the flat and there's a tunnel net 1.6 kilometres long on that flat. Now, if you've travelled from America or Melbourne or even from Brisbane and you've forked out that hard-earned money and you see that net, you will not come back. And not only that, as soon as you get home, everyone's on the phone to you.
Yeah.
How is your trip?
Taking a photo of it and, sending it to your mates in America and saying, the Australian permit fishery's cooked, don't bother coming.
Yeah. And also, I guess I focused on permit because tracker notice annex so unique, but these other fish are so critical to it as well. One of the things when you talk to the guides, they say is golden trevally are such an important flats fish for us because, that the permit are, as you know, technically challenging to catch. Yes, they're catchable, but when you go on these trips, your goal is one permit. If you get lucky in your week, you can catch quite a few more than one permit these days. You can catch 14 permit in a week or more, right? But your goal is always one. And it is a real challenge. And a lot of anglers, it may take them years to get that goal. And so these other flats fish, like golden trevally, which are more user-friendly, are very important too. Giant trevally, queenfish, these other things we sight fish on the flat. And indeed, they're an important part of the learning process that get you to permit, learning to catch those other fish. But yet there's just, you look at Australia and you're this angler, hypothetically, who's seen that net on your guided trip to Queensland. For a comparable price, you can go to Western Australia and you can fish the Ningaloo flats. You can go to the Wessel Islands in the Northern Territory. You can fish there. You can go to Cocos Keeling Islands, which has a phenomenal bonefish fishery. You can go to the Seychelles. You can go to Florida. You can go to Bahamas. You can go to the Belize. There are all these other places you can visit. Christmas Island, let's not forget, where there are net-free flats and that population of fish that is required for a flats fly fishery to exist is there, guaranteed, and you can spend that money doing that. And people just won't, in my view, spend the money travelling to Queensland to fish these flats once a tunnel net's there. And I should just add, it's not just the east coast of Queensland, unfortunately, that is of concern. My understanding is that initially it was proposed that these tunnel net trials would take place in the Gulf of Carpentaria. And I've seen documents from working notes of meetings where professional fishermen were attended and raised that prospect of a tunnel net fishery in the Gulf of Carpentaria. So we're talking potentially about Weipa, Marpoon as well. And once you combine that area with the East Coast Flats, Hinchinbrook south through Bowen down to Turkey Beach, Gladstone, top of Curtis Island, those sorts of areas, you're looking at the jewel in the crown of Australian saltwater fly fishing, really.
It is. And North Queensland is the place that's on the radar of the travelling angler right now. It's hot.
It is hot. And the other thing to say about that is that has flow-on benefits for these other places like Western Australia and the Wessels, because you do hear about anglers coming out and doing a week in Queensland and then going over to Ningaloo or going to Cocos Keeling Island and experiencing these other great fisheries.
100%, because
as well.
Australia is a long way from anywhere, isn't it? So if you're on a plane for 24 hours, you want to make the most of the journey. And yeah, a week's never going to be the duration of time that these people are coming to Australia for.
Exactly.
I guess, to summarise a little bit, but for the average fly fisher listening, someone who loves chasing permit and goldens but doesn't follow policy, why should they personally care about this right now?
My answer is this. Queensland's flats are a national fly fishing resource that the whole fly fishing community can and should treasure. Every Australian trout angler should consider visiting one day to experience just how good it really is. And even for anglers who don't want to fish the flats or never get that privileged opportunity to come up to Queensland and do it for whatever reason, those flats ultimately support the whole Australian fly fishing industry and community. To give just one example, they provide an important revenue stream for essential industry participants like tackle stores, tackle manufacturers, publications like FlyLife, which is so dear to my heart. That is an important part of that publication, this fishery. People buy that magazine because they enjoy reading about it. They enjoy the idea that we have this world-class fishery on our doorstep that they can visit and they can experience, and that's a wonderful thing. And it's a national fly fishing resource that ultimately supports all of us.
Yeah, of course. So it's the Inshore Flats Project that is up and running now. It's all very fresh. What are the top sort of 2 to 3 practical things you think that fly fishers can do if they're concerned right now?
Yes, I would say first, please do get informed. Visit the Inshore Flats Project website and learn more about the tunnel net threat. There's diagrams of what a tunnel net is. There's a very detailed paper that the Inshore Flats Project members prepared and presented to DPI, the Department of Primary Industries in Queensland, over a 2-hour meeting recently. That was Monday the week before. So please do read that information to learn more about this threat that we've been talking about. Second thing is to spread the word, talk to anglers and also non-anglers alike. We're talking about a World Heritage property here in the Great Barrier Reef marine ecosystem. Talk to them about what's proposed to happen. Show them photos of what a tunnel net is and share your concerns with them if you have them and make them aware that it's something that they too can get informed about, spread the word. And then I'll come to the third thing, which is to get involved. And initially the way to do that is to follow the Inshore Flats Project social media pages, share them and subscribe to the email list on the website, because that will assist this project to mobilise the community of supporters when opportunities arise for public consultation, making public submissions and communicating with politicians and the like, as they will over the next 12 months or so.
Good, mate. If you had one message for Queensland or for federal decision makers and one message for the fly fishing community, what would they be?
Yeah, so for decision makers, I would ask this: what is to be gained by continuing to investigate the use of tunnel nets in central and north Queensland now that the 2025 trial data enables the environmental, economic, social and cultural considerations to be weighed? It was one thing to go out and conduct a catch and release research project, return fish to the water, but you've got that data now. Look, my message would be please consider it very carefully and ask what is to be gained by going forward with investigating that gear further. I personally don't see a likely gain. What I see is a high risk that the gear will never obtain community support to operate, or will not be permitted by the Federal Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority within marine park waters, because that raises a whole lot of issues, including the fact that commercial fishermen have said that to be viable, it has to be used in dugong protected zones, which are currently gillnet free on these front flats outside the rivers and creeks. And it just seems that fact alone, this risk that the federal government will never allow use in the dugong protection areas, which we've been telling UNESCO will keep net free, is a very high risk to this whole project. The other risk, of course, is that even if this fishery is allowed to start, if it's implemented, the risk is it will ultimately prove environmentally, economically, and or socially unsustainable, causing unnecessary harm to these other economic and social values of this incredible flats fishery resource that we have in Queensland. And I guess for your podcast listeners, I think you can test the question this way. If you go onto the Inshore Flats Project website, have a read of the material in that concerns document, and then ask yourself this: if I said, would you personally invest $50,000 in supporting further tunnel net trial work? Is that a good investment, having regard to the risks and the prospect of ever obtaining a decent investment return? Certainly, that's something I would not invest in myself, yet millions of dollars in public funding have been allocated to this research program and will continue to be spent investigating this gear unless someone makes the sensible decision now to stop it. And that's something decision makers can ask themselves right now. Would they invest their own $50,000 in a tunnel net research trial program? Like I said, the risk is high and the return is low. That's my assessment of the situation, and I wouldn't touch that investment with a barge pole. And there's an opportunity cost in proceeding forward because gill nets are being phased out and commercial fishermen do need our support. No one's suggesting otherwise. And deciding now that the investigation of tunnel nets should not proceed further would avoid those risks and others, and it would enable those valuable resources to be spent on supporting Queensland's commercial fishermen with other methods and initiatives, and also other alternatives like aquaculture. And I personally believe this is the right approach to take. It's the formal position of the Inshore Flats Project. Instead of spending more money travelling down the fraught tunnel net path with all of its costs and risks, you've got the data now, and please, decision makers, give careful consideration to pulling the plug now, because that is the sensible, common sense decision to make, in my view. For the fly fishing community, what I'd say is this. Unfortunately, this is a fork in the road that could decide the future of our incredible flats fishery. It's that serious. We need to all come together and do everything we can to assist decision makers to understand why the right path to take is net-free flats in central and north Queensland. Because if that path is taken, those economic and social benefits of this world-class flats fishery will continue to grow for the benefit of everyone, fishers and non-fishers alike. And, in 30, 40 years' time, you think about how much it's evolved already, the flats fishing scene in Australia, that fishery will achieve its destiny of being one of the finest fisheries in the world. And that's a wonderful thing for everyone, including our economy. But if the wrong path is taken, there's no escaping this simple fact that flats fishery risks being destroyed. And the story of the Queensland flats fishery would then be it's over before it ever had the chance to achieve its incredible potential. And if I can make just one final point about this is not a fork in the road for the future of the seafood industry at all. It can't be suggested that a small revenue stream tunnel net fishery catching lower value species with poor or average eating reputation that makes limited or no profit and risks becoming unsustainable due to localised depletion will decide the future of the seafood industry in Queensland. We need to get real. We need to support our commercial fishermen in Queensland in other ways.
No, look, Chris, I'm just so glad that you are so involved in this project, and so many others that are have realised just how much of an issue this potentially is for our flats fishing. And yeah, I mean, I guess on behalf of me, and I'm sure all the listeners, thank you for your hard work and this contribution that because I know you're putting in a lot of hours to try and get this sorted. And yeah, I'm just so glad that you're able to sit down with us today and give us a bit more intel and an in-depth look at just how bad these things are. And I'm sure if we can get everyone together, the more noise we make, the better the outcome will be. So if you are listening, if you, I guess, know any politicians that might have some sway, or just keep talking, be aware, and protect the flats and protect the fish and get involved. This is important, and I really hope that we can make some progress and get rid of these things.
Yeah, so do I. And if I could just also emphasise, whilst I'm obviously volunteering and supporting and working hard on this, there is obviously an army of other people involved as well. Not the least, we've got 2 people in our household who are, working very hard, because Esti's been doing a lot of work on this as well. But as have a lot of other people behind the Inshore Flats Project, people donating incredible videos and, drone footage and things, and contributing to submissions and documents with important ideas and important work. So it's certainly a really great collective that's formed, and it's wonderful to see the fly fishing industry and community really now, coming together, pausing and realising that, something has to be done here, because we've got just an incredible fishery on our hands, and we just can't afford to let it go without doing everything we can to stop that happening.
Thanks, Chris. So be sure to follow the Inshore Flats Project. Check out the website and follow them on social media so you can get updates and perhaps get involved down the track. Thanks for listening. And Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the Flyfishers podcast.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. I wish we could have just talked fishing rather than talking about this, but maybe one day, sometime down the track, we can talk fishing instead. Thanks.
Awesome, mate. Thank you.
If you love saltwater fly fishing, or you've ever dreamed of catching a Queensland permit or golden trevally on the flats, this is your moment to pay attention. As you've heard, tunnel nets are an existential threat to our flats fishery. Not in 20 years, not one day, right now, while they're still in the trial stage. Every fly fisher who cares about these fish should be speaking up. Be vocal on social media, support the guides and clubs pushing back, and keep the conversation alive. The commercial value of killing permit or goldens is peanuts compared to the tourism cultural value of keeping them alive. If we don't make noise, tunnel nets will slip through on the quiet. If we are vocal, there's a real chance to stop them. Thank you.